What is up, podcast listeners and watchers? On this episode of the Vinamre Kasanaa Show, I have with me Mandovi Menon, former editor of Homegrown India, and currently heading Apalam Chapalam, which is basically a storytelling initiative for kids on Instagram. This conversation is probably one of my favorites on this podcast because we end up talking about children's stories, children's psyches, how our childhood experiences make us who we are today. A bunch of interesting things about creating online communities using your creativity, creating culture, fusing regional content and regional stories with a very internet centric world. All of those great things. I think Mandovi is very self aware about what she knows and what she does best. And I had a blast talking to her. Enjoy the conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, like, share, and subscribe. And if you're listening on any of the audio platforms, make sure you follow. Enjoy the episode. And we're live. What is up, Mandovi Menon? First of all, it is a pain in the ass to record a podcast when Mumbai is facing severe internet connection issues. Having said that, when I was texting with you, you do this, you leave like an X after the end of the texts. And because I don't know what that means, I grew up at a time when XOXO was like signed on a love letter or like a friendship pact. I figured, like it's just fashion to go along with it, but I don't know what that means. And several people are doing it, and I don't want to be left out of it.
Okay. So let me, you know what? I think I'm just realizing that I don't know what the real meaning of it is. But I do it. I can tell you where it comes from. It's a way that like ends things a little bit more warmly than with very clinical, cold, professional vibes. If I'm dealing with you very seriously, you'll get a full stop. And that means I mean business.
Yeah.
It means like we can have a nice, chill conversation. And I think that's where that came from. It was quite subconscious. Sorry for the big signals.
No, that's fine. It's because I think emojis, I just can't stand emojis. I don't like using emojis too much. I don't know. It just gives away like an emotion that I'm not ready to give away via text. So I just go with no full stops and no punctuations to signify that, whatever words move between us, they're just like, like conversations are still happening. It's never like an end. Because I hate people when, it's like when people realize they could be grammar Nazis and they just never stopped. Like they realized back in 2008, or wo aaj bhi full stop kar rahe hain. So yeah, even I can't stand full stops.
I have changed my feelings about emojis over the years. I feel like it's allowed language to expand, and rather than resisting that change, it's good to kind of look at it as an additional layer of language. And if people want to use it, it's able to communicate a lot. You can interpret it into words. And I feel sometimes there is an overkill, but people can do that with words as well. So
That's
I like
true.
to think of it as a new sort of layer of linguistics you can play with.
That's true. I mean, I agree. I'm pretty sure there's some academic who's going like, yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
But there's just something about that laughing emoji with the crying laughing. Yeah. And for some reason, I think, look, I know if the joke is funny, I will laugh. I don't need that for some reason. And especially when you know the person in real life and the emoji comes to you and it's uncharacteristic, like that's something that those people would never do in life. So it's just, I don't know. I just have a hard time wrapping my head around that. But fuck emojis for a while. I want to talk about what's up?
How would you express laughter?
How do I express laughter? I think
with the limitations of text. I'm changing the interview dynamic over here.
No, absolutely. I appreciate when people ask me questions. That's something that rarely happens. It's usually me going blah blah blah. But I would just leave it to the silence, or I send voice notes, which I think is even better because that's like
I agree.
Yeah, just send voice notes and just have people like listen in public as they put the speaker to their ear to make sure like they get what you're saying, and you just basically transmit your entire personhood via WhatsApp in a better fashion. I don't know, but yeah.
We do a whole podcast on this. Honestly, I have a lot to say about voice notes too. Interrupting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but we can talk about voice notes. What do you want to say about voice notes?
I think that'd be amazing. It's a goal. You don't have to wait to hear. Someone can take that time and like respond when they want, and you get communicate all the tonality of your voice. They're a great convention. I think it's the best thing and the best way to communicate.
Yeah, my friend and I have this secret WhatsApp group. We've decided never to correspond on it. What we do is if we hear something funny on the street or in the world that people older than us occupy, like the uncles and aunties. So we hear a funny dialogue, we just put it out on the voice note and we use it as a bank for future jokes, future references. And so we can pretty much like borrow from something we heard in 2019. It's been going on for a while now. But I really want to start talking about the stuff that you've been doing in the Indian creative space, particularly your new venture. I hope I'm not butchering the name. Apalam Chapalam. Isn't that like a
Chapalam.
Apalam Chapalam?
You're there.
Yeah. What's with the name?
Okay, great question. It has no meaning. It's nonsense verse, and it's from an old Hindi song, actually.
Yes, I saw that on YouTube.
Yeah. If you have ever read Roald Dahl or Dr. Seuss and a lot of my favorite children's authors, at least, I like the fact that they play with language and things don't always have to make sense. That's something that has always been a playground for me. And both Alia and I, my partner in Apalam Chapalam, we both sort of created the space together. We knew that was the mood we wanted to go towards. And given that it was kind of regional storytelling and much more localized in terms of languages, we knew we wanted it to be an Indian nonsense verse. And I grew up with a lot of Satyajit Ray and his father Sukumar. And I don't know if you've ever come across Abol Tabol or any of this amazing Bengali nonsense verse that kind of existed almost a century ago now, probably. And a lot of Bengali children grew up with that kind of stuff. And so we wanted to capture that mood, and Apalam Chapalam was the perfect fit. It's actually Alia's mother's just over the dinner table, that kind of conversation. So those are the names that always stick. And it's gotten a really nice response. Also, as an additional trivia, Apalam means papadam in Malayalam. I don't know.
Papadam is the papad.
Have you ever had those incredible papads from Kerala?
There's two papads, right? There's the one that's, I guess, the North Indian one with some dots.
It does have a meaning.
Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't have the dots. So the
South
plain
Indian
one. Papadam is like it's plain
it's
really
like a
fluffy,
cloud, basically.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, correct. So yeah, it has all these. It's just taken on whatever meaning anyone wants it to have, I guess. And that's the name.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about the Roald Dahl stories that I also read, because I read a bunch, and it starts from the way he names his chocolates, right? It's like Scoobly Gumptious, Scrumptious, Wonka Bar, something like that. And that adds to the appeal of the chocolate bar. Otherwise, it could just have been like, let's have a chocolate. That's how adults speak, right? Like, can I have a piece of chocolate, right? But instead, it's this adjective written thing that has, meaning beyond the ordinary for a kid. Because for a kid, the difference between like a 5-star and a Mars bar is massive. For us, it's just about the taste.
Couldn't agree more. I think, there's a whole dictionary now that exists called just the Roald Dahl dictionary. And I think writers should kind of aspire towards that in some way. I mean, if you're playing in the fictional kind of nonsensical world, obviously not journalists. So I think there's some room even over there. It comes back to what I was saying earlier. I like the idea of language not being so rigid. And being able to hold so much more than just, what the letters or the words say. Like, it can have an emotion attached to it. It should make you feel something. And that idea of words is a lot more important to me and something that I like to capture when I'm writing. It's why poetry and children's books are it's an amazing space. It's something that's very close to my heart and agenda free.
So how did you decide to start working with children's literature? I mean, considering that there are bookstores all across the country in different cities, whether those are like really small towns or like even like villages where there are already publications that are, printing 10 rupee books where they have like a moral at the end, something along those lines. An infinite rendition of Tenali Raman and Akbar Birbal stories, all of those, right? So entering the children's story space via Instagram or video medium, how did that come about?
So, when I look back at it, it makes perfect sense. Like it should have happened a long time ago. Personally, I've been writing children's books from a pretty young age. I was 21.
So you've been writing children's books.
I have. And
Interesting.
right, it's not something that everybody knows because I have not got around to publishing, though I do have a publishing offer on the table now, and I am looking at doing that. It's something that people very close to me know. Children's books and poetry is something that's been going on for a while, but didn't ever seem like tangible, like something that you can actually make your life out of.
Right.
It seemed like a dream and a hobby, and you get to pursue it on the side. But in terms of Apalam, it was really, I think, from a very, very young age. I was quite lucky to grow up with a mother like mine, and she's been a child rights activist and worked in the social sector. And one of the very interesting organizations that she worked with when I was young was called Comet Media Foundation, which still exists, and people should check it out. But really what they were focused on was alternative education and at the grassroots level, and creating kind of low-cost alternatives and that are the powerful sort of tools to disseminate the right kind of education. And a lot of that was through storytelling. So I had access, I realized, to the kinds of regional and cultural literature that most of my peers and contemporaries didn't have growing up. I didn't realize how unusual it was until I got a lot older. And I'm still very attached to those. I have many, many, many of the, like, if I could take you out, I would show you my collection. But all the literature that I sort of still have very strong memories about, it's like The Andaman Boy by Cy Whittaker and Tara and Tulika books. So these are things that now, I think the time was very right. Instagram may have become very polarized in terms of politics, etc. But culturally speaking, it's really diversified what you can put out there, and people are hungry to kind of learn more about culture. That's been my experience, not just with Apalam, but all the work before that as well. And it's been something that I've been quite passionate about getting out there in some way. I feel that any work you do should be bringing some kind of value. And one of the key drivers for me is kind of in space for more diversified cultural and regional sort of creative art forms that do exist. And in terms of video format, mediums are just mediums. I've always been quite agnostic about them. Anything storytelling should be able to adapt itself and be flexible and kind of wrap itself. Especially writing, I think, is at the heart and is the foundation of all kinds of storytelling, whether it's film, whether you're doing a graphic novel, all of that, right? I mean, I'm sitting here and I'll, I do storyboard as well with Alia. Just to, even if it's something that's not going to be a comic, like to be able to imagine the world that you're building. So video was the right way because it needed to be, of course, it needed to be accessible for these children. And it was the easiest sort of form of between listener and the story. To have an actual storyteller, we wanted to recreate the feeling of oral storytelling and someone in your own family sitting in a room with you and telling you a story. So because that was a driving kind of factor in what we were trying to do, it just seemed like a natural fit. And Instagram is very much not for the children themselves. There we are sort of trying to widen and the scope of the people who know about it and people to become contributors in terms of becoming storytellers for these children. And it's been working very well.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the Instagram page is popping. I've been seeing it. I couldn't help but wonder the similarities between your experience growing up around oral storytellers and having sort of alternative stories that were regional in nature, that weren't available to, say, the city that you were growing up in that case, which is Bombay, right? Which is, how do I say, like, there's a very city-driven culture around it. Because my whole experience growing up was different from people who were with me, because I belong from a specific community, Gujar Kshatriyas, and as a result, we just have a lot more older people still alive who sit down with their hookahs and tell stories to younger kids, and the way it's said is something like, those small packages of wisdom where you have this entirely sarcastic story about someone doing something really stupid, and then what's the lesson? And that's the theme that sort of kept emerging again and again throughout my life whenever I visit my village or even in my own home, right? Because that's how everyone grew up. And then when I brought these stories to, say, a classroom or say to my friends, it instantly made me realize how different our upbringings were, right? When everyone was reading the classic, whatever was available to them via books, right? And I had this rich world of oral storytellers, and it still continues to this day. But the issue that I face is, how do I make it accessible to the rest of the world? Because one, there's a huge language barrier.
Absolutely.
And second, it's, you just have to, I don't know, you have to like trim off some of the edges to make sense, because it's so it's so entrenched in its own culture that to make it accessible, you have to maybe like get rid of a couple of things. I don't know. How did you tackle that?
It's such a great question, and you'll be happy to know that you and I are not the only ones thinking about this. Not enough people yet, but there's a really wonderful kind of movement that's building, that's held by people like Jerry Pinto. I don't know. I'm sorry, my throat is quite bad. I don't have COVID, I promise.
Yeah, you're not going to transmit it via laptops. You're fine.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So there are people like Jerry Pinto. There's something called Mother Tongue Twisters, and really there's
Mother Tongue Twisters. What is that?
So they are a very interesting platform. I would rather not kind of speak about it and butcher it. It's probably better that people get it for themselves. But they are sort of pushing the idea that there needs to be more translation between regional language to regional language.
Interesting.
So what we have a lot of is that, the more popular languages, for lack of a better word, they get translated into English, or English into, the bigger sort of culture. So Telugu has a very rich kind of literature to it. Hindi literature is a big one. And in that sense, actually what they're sort of trying to push is that, why can't there be Bengali to Telugu and Telugu to Bengali, or more of that? Because translation is a very interesting art form. I don't think I paid enough attention to it till I started doing Apalam Chapalam. And personally, I feel a huge disconnect from my roots, because I don't have as strong a sense of my own mother tongues, which are Bengali and Malayalam, as I should have, because, all of us have grown up in this generation where it's like English medium, English education means you will progress in the world. And I understand, where that came from. But to lose that is to lose an entire world. And there's a different imagination that kind of comes with it. You think of certain words, like even now, I'm sure you have this, I have this as well. There are certain things that I can't communicate in English. There's a different word for it. My sister, who's lived in America for the last 12 years now, there are certain words that just don't happen the same way. They don't communicate the same thing. So I don't think that we should lose that. And I have a lot more to say about this.
Yeah. Let me riff on that more. So you have a lot more to say about that right after. I have a friend in the USA. He's going to come visit India. I went there for college for about 4 years, and he always grew up in a household that sort of spoke Hindi and Urdu, but they were also sort of losing it. And then I introduced all the swear words I knew. And I come from a very rich swear word background. Matlab, jitne bhi galiyan, like the worst, I know all of them. And not like, because everyone says like they're a swear word champion, but I'm saying really, because I know the regional ones, and they're horrible, horrible, horrible swear words that will really like make you achieve levels of meaning you can never in English or even in Hindi. Like, it'll hurt you in places you didn't even know you could be hurt, right? It's so funny in that sense. It adds to camaraderie. So I introduced some of those words to him. I said, you can feel free to practice your Hindi with me, because you have that, and I love encouraging people to experiment with language as well. And it's so funny because he doesn't have all the contextual clues, right? The swear words that he would use, I've never heard, because he would combine two disparate objects like masturbation and chai. Makes no sense. But it's just because he doesn't have the context. Like we don't think about like, hey, I'm gonna drink some chai and then masturbate. It's not something that occurs to us. It's not in our context.
Something new in the process. Who knows?
What's up?
He might invent something new in the process.
And he does. He's coming. But it's the idea that because he was given sort of a safe place to practice this language, what he comes up with for like as someone who's always wanted to express that part of himself.
Yeah.
But it's been, especially with being in the Indian diaspora, it's been so repressed, and it's sort of like always aspirational, always looking to the country for hope and meaning. And then suddenly you have this language now, and you can create your own and add maybe like another dimension to who you are and express things that you could never express before. And I think that is wonderful.
It's definitely one of the most amazing things about it. I don't know if you saw, I think it's even good practice to kind of try if you're much more comfortable in English. Like for me, Apalam Chapalam has been quite, it's been a big thing as well, right? There are many things in languages that I don't speak, I don't understand. And I'm introduced to many nuances that I didn't have before. And it's been very interesting to see the response now. One of my friends, the one who painted this actually, did this amazing Marwari folk tale.
Yeah.
And that her grandmother used to tell her when she was very young, her and her 3 sisters. And she kind of updated it because it was a bit, misogynistic in its messaging. And she wanted to make sure that it was still a good and more contemporary message.
Right.
And she thought this is something that her grandmother had made up. The amount of people who kind of wrote back, and all from the Marwari community, saying that this is something that my grandparents used to tell me. This is something, I can't believe that somebody else has the same story. And they each had different interpretations as to why their grandparents had kind of told them this story. For one, it was so that they stopped wetting the bed. For another, it was like, to kind of keep them disciplined and in check. And it was quite amazing to kind of learn. I went deeper into that culture to kind of understand what are the other regional stories. We couldn't find this anywhere. This story did not exist. So something else that I think can happen, and it's still fun, right? People aren't going to feel like it's academic and it's difficult to pursue when it's in the form of stories. So, but building that archive and that repository of regional literature is important. I think it's a record of the most imaginative minds from history who've come up with all kinds of things, and they can always be made contemporary. I think it's just a matter of changing the medium.
What's the challenge that you face with making something that's has lasted forever, like a perennial story in a way, and it's been passed down orally? What's the challenge you face with making it contemporary? Because something you said about it being misogynistic, or like the fact that sometimes that's the stories that were written at a certain time reflect the conditions of that time. So how do you make sure that you retain the essence while still making it more accessible?
I can't believe I was nervous about this conversation earlier, and I'm like, this is great. This is exactly what I want. So I'll tell you my personal take on this. I don't believe that, if something was written in a particular way, I think there's merit in consuming it as it was in its pure form, because the context is at least as important as the message that it was giving.
Right.
So just by changing something, you can't erase the fact that is the way that many people used to think and continue to think now. But I love that with oral storytelling, what happens, like in the case of this friend of mine, is each person who tells the story, there are these mild edits that happen in real time, and think about, but whoever it was who used to tell you stories in your own family, every time they told you the same story again and again, there are these little changes that happen. And that's kind of how it evolves on its own over time. It's in this particular form, when it's oral storytelling and it's passed down, I think it naturally and in a much slower and more real way takes on new shapes anyway, which is why I think we should encourage more of it. And it's far more accessible than, books and other things. Just right now, given the kind of world we're in and the disparity, I think this is a really great way to plug that gap.
Damn. Yeah. When you were saying that, it's like, I know what the Ramayana is, right? But I've always heard it through my dad. And as a kid, he spoke about the Ramayana in an aspirational, let me teach you what morals, son sort of manner. Now he does it the same way he talks with his business associates. And now he's a rough shot, man, right? He's rusting in some elements and super educated in others, right? And the Ramayana then becomes like this story that he would narrate over like a chai. कि फिर उसने ऐसा कहा, फिर उसने आया कह रहा ये नहीं हो सकता अब. So it just, the whole flavor of the story changes from this epic to, like as if these people, although, they're not mere mortals by any capacity, that I somehow understand them because I understand that lingo. It's the same way as why I know several Haryanvis will prefer watching regional comedy and enjoying very regional humor that maybe they cannot see like in a Delhi stand-up comedy club where the audience is pretty much, like homogenous to Delhi in a way, or Mumbai for that matter. Like people go out of their ways to find stuff that they can connect to in a way that's, I don't know, like I would say like a characteristic of their upbringing almost.
Absolutely. What's familiar, right? You understand there's way more nuance to what's familiar to you. I mean, if you're sitting in Scandinavia and watching Nordic Noir, you're going to feel differently about it to me sitting over here and enjoying it a lot.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things I'm missing. And for us, that sense of really being able to understand something much more completely, it makes sense. It's like Indian memes, that's a language of its own. I think.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's at another level. It's a form of humor that the rest of the world may not realize how evolved it is. But right up there, I think.
What's up? Say that again. You got cut off.
It's right up there. Like Indian humor is something that I feel that only people who are really being raised over here and like understand the context around it can appreciate it to the level that it deserves to be appreciated.
Yeah. Do you have connections with, you said that you seem that you feel like that Bengali and Malayali culture are a little bit off to you or closed off to you. Do you have guilty pleasures in these cultures? Maybe it's films that you watch, maybe it's like absurd soap operas that you watch.
To be honest, no. I feel like the cultural genetic kind of influence is deeper, and I've only begun to kind of unravel what that is right now. Have I watched? I mean, of course, I've watched, all of Satyajit Ray films, and those were things that I had to watch academically at some point as part of some mass media course in college. And then I revisited it much later. And it's more, I think my access to these cultures is far more personal. My family was full of people who may not have been in creative fields always, but were extremely creative in their expression. I think that's totally and I think that's true for so many people who grew up in our generation. We were at that cusp, right, where the access to entertainment wasn't so digital and wasn't kind of so available as it is. And then we experienced that complete shift, and it made its own ways. But there is a part of me that kind of still longs for that and finds nostalgia and things that are not replicated in this world.
Sorry, you got cut off completely for a sec. What was that? Think of this world.
Things that cannot be replicated in the digital world.
Yes. I still remember what my attention span was like before the smartphone came around. I remember that distinctly. Like that was me. We'd gone to Dubai once and I'd purchased like an MP3 player. I remember listening to songs on it over and over again. I had the musician Sarthi Kauravar on the podcast yesterday, and he was talking about how, like we've entered a culture of passive listening where if you ask someone like, hey, what songs did you listen to? He's like, I listen to a bunch of shit on Spotify. I don't really recognize if it's my music or someone else's. Yeah. But there was a very sort of, I don't know, like in the pre smartphone, expansion world that we had analog technologies. We were sort of at the first innovators to figure out key you could watch YouTube, or you could, put up aesthetic pictures on Instagram and stuff. And so we've spent some parts of our childhood just with our thoughts and just with our friends and just, interacting with art and the world around us without being mediated by a smartphone, which I think kids that are being born today don't have. Like, I wonder about how many kids are, turning 13 today and they're going to have their first smartphones. And the switch from there, like the world is never going to be the same. So, I mean,
I think they have access to it far earlier than 13. They may not own one, but they're one in a huge way. I look at my niece and my nephew even, and we're a pretty analog family, I would say, in many ways. But our only way to communicate is through the smartphone. They're so precocious, and they know exactly where it is at all times, as young as like 2 and 1, and their ability to kind of, I don't want to put it down yet. I think
Yeah.
I understand it well enough. I'm hoping that I think there will be a natural rejection when it reaches its complete saturation point. And I really hope, I've spoken to my sister about this a lot, especially in context of my niece and nephew, because I don't want them to grow up with this level of privacy issues, etc. And I don't know that that generation will want to, kind of display all their private information online or things like that. Things may change. Like, I think that as consumer demand and understanding and knowledge about these things develop, it really is possible that we can build a new world. I'm very hopeful about that, because there are amazing things that technology and the digital media age have given us, and my life has been kind of made off of it. So
Likewise. Yeah. So my intent is to simply have a conversation about it, is to so that I can understand how we can resist the, I don't know, like the ugly offshoots of it and keep the best parts, because there is, on some level, despite the fact that we made this happen via the internet, right? There are parts of technology that especially with networks, right? That you just get involved in so much that, here's my fear. I think that people go online and try to find their identity by looking at online groups and thinking, if I fit in this one, do I fit in this one? And I think there is less engagement with the physical world as there once was, and I often say this, live offline, publish online. Like, live a life offline where you have experiences, meet people, and then talk about those experiences online. And for some reason, being able to have immersive conversations and experiences offline adds to like a fresh, air of I don't know, like fresh perspective that most people don't have. Most conversations online tend to be very low level and unstructured, because I don't know, there's a gap that people are trying to fill. It's a very complicated issue, and I do believe that being able to add the sense of immersion that you get from stories when you listen to a story with rapt attention online is probably like one of the steps, because we don't have enough grounding myths in the online world. We don't have enough grounding narratives in the online world. We have what we have is a bunch of chaotic noise.
That wow, there were so many nuggets in that. I don't even know which one to pick up from.
Yeah, I just went on a tangent.
It was a good tangent. It's something I think about a lot. I do think I'm going to just bring it back to. I think there's potential for more empowerment. I think it comes down to that, right? As consumers, as readers, and so I'm taking it away from you and I now being creators of content and publishing online to more conscious consumption, to understanding why, where, what is appealing, to understand how it works, to ask for more accountability. I'll give you an example. I'm very, very sort of steeped in the world of digital media and independent media specifically, right?
Right.
That's sort of the foundation of my earlier career with Homegrown, etc. And it still surprises me that, even 7 years after that, 6-7 years after that, there isn't more independent media that's coming up. And I read I don't know if you follow the Ken.
I do.
You ever?
I briefly. Yeah.
They're a really fantastic kind of model that exists, and great sort of coverage in media in general. And they have published this amazing sort of graphic story, an 80-page graphic story, and maybe you could share it for your podcast listeners. And they've broken down something so important that there is no knowledge about how independent media is no longer able to get foreign funding, which allowed them to innovate, allowed them to be competitive and kind of take on the archaic dinosaurs, which is like, Dainik Bhaskar, Times of India, etc. The reason that we have, look, whether or not you agree with, Swarajya or The Wire or any of these things, it's important that they exist. And we have a right to make those choices. It shouldn't be just this consolidated small network of people who are more focused on like kind of writing and communicating for the advertiser, and there's a lot of proof and reason for us to get, to know that that is what is happening because they're running on losses, then we can ask for more. We have been completely kept out of that conversation. There's so few readers who actually know this is happening. So you have to be a true industry insider to even understand. So it becomes incumbent upon us, I think, then to make sure that more people know this, to make things accessible for more people. And in a way, that's what social media has given us, right? You and I can be an independent media platform just as individuals if we wanted.
Yes.
We can build that kind of credibility. And I've seen it happen with so many people. And so many people in our generation are actually getting their information and news from individuals who they trust online rather than a media company. And yeah, the answer sort of lies there, not 500 bazillion kind of conglomerates and MNCs, but smaller, independent, more localized businesses of all kinds, and us kind of supporting those.
Yeah, the writer David Perel on Twitter, he says something along the lines of the future's teachers will be entertainers online. Whoever does it best will get to do it for everyone. And I think that's true because what we do is basically knowledge work. We can call ourselves knowledge workers in a way where we pass through, like see through and like assimilate and collect a lot of previously unconnected dots, put it together, package it, and say like, this is something that's worth consuming. And it's also funny that we can do that as individuals without having to, put on your Sunday face or your Monday face and say you can't say this, you can't say that. That's one of the beauties of this medium. I have one Hindi podcast where I just riff with my friends, have fun, and I have this, right, where I speak to cultural thought leaders, and I can choose to do either, right? It's I make my money elsewhere. I don't have to worry about any of that. So it can just be a conversation that I want to have with someone that I admire, right? And it is remarkable in the sense that we are doing that in this period of time. I never thought as a kid that this is where my life would take me, where I'm having, conversations with strangers and trying to get the most insightful pieces of information / quotes that, can then stand the test of time, and people can plug in and say, I want to learn about how to grow a creative community. Oh, great. There's a podcast with Mandovi and Vinamre. Let's check it out. Right. That's what I think about. But I want to segue into this whole idea of using the internet to create networks. Right. And I remember distinctly when Homegrown came around, I was a kid. I was like in my teens, and I mean, in the sense like I was like 17, 18, maybe. But I was like, what is happening here? This is something cool-ish, especially as a kid who was living in Faridabad, which is like right next to New Delhi, satellite city at best. I was sort of deprived of the culture of being in a metropolis where there's cafes and gymkhanas and things to do, right? Like we didn't have like a solid culture. So I was instantly pulled in. I was like, okay, I can now check out where are gigs, what cool artists to follow, what's sort of happening in the Indian cultural space in a very fashionable, excuse my comparison, Vice Media-esque fashion. And I was really excited for it. And I wonder what sort of like skills / I don't know, like insight that you had that allowed you to think there's something here that no one else is addressing. There's a vacuum in the market. And how did you like jump on that?
You position this question so differently from everybody else. I feel compelled to answer it differently. Usually it's like, why did you start Homegrown? So look, I think what it was is that it's like you said, you were in Faridabad. We grew up in Bombay. We were looking at these, it really comes down to what we do, what we were seeing in front of us. And you're just looking at this and wondering, why is there no space for this? And for me, I was, in a Times Internet Limited job, writing 5 articles a day for a men's lifestyle magazine. I can't believe I'm saying this. Do not look it up. And no, honestly, I have a lot of good memories, and we'll come back to that. But there were very few avenues where I could write about the stuff that I was finding extremely exciting. I was inspired by the level of creativity. We were naturally have this community because we were interested in music and art and kind of all these amazing kind of communities that existed organically on ground. That it just made sense. It was such a it was such a sweet, youthful, kind of fearless, idealistic idea that there was really, at least personally for me, I can say that I felt it was important to do this because there was no space for these people, and we weren't being represented at all. I didn't feel like Indian youth at all, and its identity and its culture was being represented in an honest, authentic way at all. And I'm not saying that the world we represented was all that it was. There was much more. And it kept expanding as we want more, right? So it became very much a magnet. And so the small insular world that we had access to when we started building it, then that kind of grew and it grew and it grew. And we ourselves sort of learned about so many things that we didn't know before. So yeah, it was very much about that. That editorial was kind of born from that. And it was a playground to write all the stories that nobody else would ever let me. So
yeah, I'm trying to understand. Wait, hold on. There's a lag, right? Can you hear it? Okay, it's fine. It's fine now. Yeah. So you didn't start off as tastemakers. You sort of just decided, I think this is interesting, and therefore you, random Indian on the internet, should know about sneaker culture, right? Or you should know where all the EDM gigs are happening in the city, or you should know why this specific community in this village is the best artisan you can find.
I mean, who were we to be tastemakers? We were children ourselves. We were just excited, and that's how I continue to approach any work and any coverage that I do. It's not to say that I know what's best. It's just that I think this is really incredible and amazing. And I think if you approach things authentically, and you're honest about what it is that you like and or don't like, whatever that is, there's going to be people, and that's how community is built. It's over shared interests. And I like what you said earlier about, how too many people are kind of trying to find identity online. I think if we just, we sought our identity through reflection and introspection and all of those things, but we can go online to find community and to grow our sense of like understanding. And that for me is a beautiful part of the internet. The kinds of amazing, how would, you and I would have never kind of interacted had that not existed. So that's amazing. Why not? And it doesn't mean that we agree on everything, that we have all the same interests, that we have the same, background or understanding or any of that. But there are certain things that we know that we want to discuss and that we can gain from in exchange and interaction with each other. And the internet facilitates that. So, and media especially facilitated that. So yeah, that was very much kind of the thinking that went into it. And it wasn't so, I would say it didn't have like this long-term agenda. And for me, it was about, can we get 500 million people to be viewing it? Unfortunately, that's very much the kind of rat race that media became and continues to kind of go down that path. But I see people breaking away from that. And I think that's great. And we need more kind of risk-taking individuals who you don't have to be greedy about viewership. I think impactful, solid, engaged, loyal viewership is far more valuable than having 500,000 eyeballs on your clickbait and otherwise.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic, because I know several people who have a lot of views, and I know for a fact, these are friends I know, who don't sleep well at night because I mean, there are great cases to be made for product market fit and all of those things, but there's just something about saying your truth and sleeping peacefully, because you don't have to remember things. You're just like, this is who I am, like straight up. And so that, adds to a whole conversation about transparency and being who you are online, irrespective of the costs. Although I do think that, and this is my own critique as like someone who's also trying to work in the culture space, although I hate using that term culture, but in India also, like there's too many magazines and publications trying to say, we will tell you what culture is, right? But I inhabit two worlds. I've seen Bharat also, I've seen India also. And the Bharat side of the culture, it's represented in regional, stories and stuff. Yes. Yeah. But when it comes to culture, why are all culture magazines relegated to the same sneaker and like music stories? Why don't we have enough? Why don't we have more?
I have done a full like 360 on this, personally and professionally. I think it's a good question. Um, I got tired of many aspects of that quite quickly, and so I something that happened very naturally was it took me to the next and the next and the next, and that's why a natural progression has been something like an Apalam. When something starts being repetitive and kind of a circle jerk, it does happen. It's not something that I've gone out on record saying very often. Um, I worry about that not just in the culture space. I worry about that from even politically. I think everything is extremely polarized. You have to either you have to stick with your community against all odds. Then which I mean, there's a lot of power in that. I don't think you should turn your back on your community, but there should be an open and free spirit of inquiry and being able to challenge and being able to ask questions and still being able to laugh about it in the end and stay in the same room.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is just a culture conversation. I think this is an identity conversation, a politics conversation, many, many, many things. And there are always people on the margins who are challenging that. And I think it's important to just expand who we're listening to in a conscious way. So if I'm finding that too many of the things that I'm listening to are sounding the same, I like to go out there and seek something else or really think about that. I surround myself with those kinds of people in real life as well. These are choices that we get to make, and we can't blame the external world, I think, for that. We have to really seek that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've spoken to a couple of people who work in the culture space, and I was having a conversation with them about fashion.
Yeah.
And I made a tweet about this. It got some response, and it's like, the reason street style will never work in India
Why?
is because it's imported from LA and New York. If you look at the Indian street, that's not what people wear. People wear safari suits. People wear gamchas, right? The Indian street is vastly different from, say, the LA street or the New York street. So if you really want to make street style work, make sure that the cool, quote unquote, upperly mobile Indian feels connected with whoever he sees on the street, the working class man, in a completely different capacity. If you can make the safari suit fashionable, holy shit, that's gonna, that's gonna take off.
I think that's happening. I have a opinion. Absolutely. I'll name brands for you who I think look, if you want to talk about this from a point of view of accessibility in terms of price point, yes, that is something that needs to be worked on. But in terms of people who are really, really very creatively adapting what street style means and contextualizing it to the Indian experience, it is there. I think No Black, No White is next level with
No Black, No White. That's their name.
That's their name.
Okay.
I really, and these are girls who have lived in Toronto and India, so they naturally kind of have that balance between these cultures, and it's more authentic. So maybe that's why it's working so. But similarly, there's another brand called Space Biscuit, which all of their stuff is inspired by ISRO, which
interesting.
When you see that kind of conceptualization going into it, people are digging further into their roots. They're understanding. You can't because people are asking the kinds of questions that you are, and rightfully so, and they should be. No one wants to see a carbon copy. I don't think there's anything wrong with exchange of culture. Street style was great in America. There's no reason why it can't exist here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a rip-off. No, let's see some adaptation and contextualization to our culture, and I really believe that's happening and it's coming, and I'm excited for it. I see it all the time.
Yeah, I'm gonna check out these brands after. I think this was like a personal, selfish question because I really want to experiment with that, and the only things I have accessible is like I'll wear maybe a gamcha or I'll tuck my shirt in, but I really just want to feel like I'm out on the street, and just really feel all the elements.
Yeah. And I'll send you many, many more, not just the street style space, but I think this is happening across all creative fields. And I'm happy to see that shift as of the last 2 years or 3 years, I would say.
It's the same as, McDonald's also contextualizes its menus all across the world because it knows certain people won't have certain foods, and that's just the way it is. Yeah. Mandovi, let's talk about Leher India and the minor project and Apalam Pachalam in Chapalam. So sorry, in tandem, right? Because I see those three tagged on your Instagram bio, and I'm a bit confused about how these three operate together. What's the idea?
They don't all operate together. Okay, let's try to break it down. So Apalam Chapalam was pretty much a lockdown project that we began. We spoken about that a little bit before, and it was specifically storytelling for underprivileged children during an extremely challenging period, which is right now. It continues, and it's evolved a lot in the last. I can't even say that we expected it to last this long because nobody knew how this period was going to unfold.
Yeah.
The minor project is actually a project that came to us because of our work with Apalam Chapalam, and that is Untitled India and Leher are long-time collaborators. I myself have worked with them in different capacities before. And for that reason, it is essentially a public dialogue initiative to help end violence against children. So there the objective is kind of through mediums only. We want to kind of engage with people in this 18 to 35 age group. It's again agenda free. We're not looking at, can we have 500 million people come here? But the idea is to really educate, make people more aware about the extent of these issues, which have actually gotten a lot worse during this period of pandemic. So, I mean, I'm talking child marriages cases going up higher than ever, and there's many, many more. I won't get into stats over there. But how do we kind of make this age group, which we naturally feel a bit of a disconnect from childhood, I think, because we've just made our way into adulthood, and it's easier to kind of care about issues that are more immediately around us, right?
Right.
Whether it's LGBTQ or it's women's empowerment, those are things that we are experiencing or people right around us are. So we can speak on those with a certain measure of confidence. So we're trying to kind of build that kind of vocabulary and all of that through the minor project as well. And it's just 3-month long public dialogue kind of initiative, and it's only just begun. So hopefully we'll see how it goes. It's already had very, very interesting response in the first few days, but I'm actually not at liberty to talk too much more about it, except
I understand.
Already out there.
Yeah. But I want to talk about one thing that I think you will like talking about, and that's there's a song by Pink Floyd called Childhood's End, and it's I don't know if you've listened to the song, but it's like something like, you shout in your sleep, that's the price you have to keep. It's like something about the idea of just waking up in a nightmare and your childhood is gone. And obviously Gilmore is like super cynical in the song, but there is, I think, where we are at right now, there is a very strong departure from childhood as we enter into our adult selves. I don't know how old you are. I'm 23 right now, right? So I
feel like an auntie.
Why?
I felt that the age gap was less, but it's fairly large.
Oh my God! Please don't tell me you're like 57.
31, but it's
31.
fine.
Yeah. You know what's funny? The last 2-3 podcast guests have all been 31. But yeah, that's weird.
You like the age group, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's just that I think that when I talk to 20 somethings, they're still like me as well. Like they have a couple of concrete things going, but they're figuring it out. I think in general, by the 30s, people have some concrete things to talk about in their lives, and like they are how to say it? They can think in more complete sentences. So that's like a good podcast group to have. But in general, though, that's when people really sort of like, hone down on what they do best, and you start seeing them in public. You're like, that's a cool person to get on the podcast. But talking about this idea of like getting away from childhood, when you are working on these stories for children, do you incorporate feedback from children? Do you actively work with children?
Absolutely. We haven't had direct contact, but Leher basically had a large network of field workers and community workers, because we had to make sure that these stories were going directly into communities and actually reaching children.
Right.
So many of them, like Children India has been one of our partners, and I think Cry as well. There's documentation of it. I don't have all the names at the top of my head. Mm-hmm. But they have sent us some incredible feedback directly from the children. They have written their own stories, their own poems, made their own kind of like storyboards of different things after having seen certain. Obviously there are some that they love more, and in different places. We've also worked with juvenile remand homes and children's homes. So there's a lot. It's a very wide network, and it's been amazing. It's all consolidated around this because I think what happens is there's always focus and attention towards the survival stuff like food, money, etc. But no one ever thinks of leisure and imagination and wonder and keeping that aspect of childhood alive and feeding that, which is so important. Like, why is it that someone of less means does not deserve that? That is something that we can give so freely, and it's a different kind of currency. And I would love to introduce that idea to people because there's a sense of helplessness that I realized a lot of people were feeling, myself included, especially at the beginning of lockdown with the migrant crisis, sorry. And kind of watch things unfold that you feel you can do nothing about. And beyond the point, there are people who, of course, have the means to donate a lot of money, let's say. But there's a sense of detachment with that I personally feel exists. And if you're able to kind of take the time, and Apalam has been so interesting because you have grandmothers and you have, the elderly as well. Kind of people who otherwise don't feel like they have any way to contribute to society or what's happening around them. And you're empowering everyone to believe that there's a way to show compassion and to show that you actually care that goes beyond, having the means to be able to donate money always.
Right.
So I think that is a big aspect, and it's been really wonderful to see the kinds of people that's drawn out. Apalam does not look like cool young cultural revolutionaries who are leading that kind of charge over there. It has the artists, it has the creators, it has all of that. But I love the fact that it has, aunties and uncles and grannies and grandpas who are doing their thing, and really that's what people are loving, I think, about it.
Yeah, also, not to sound like a social scientist, but with the rise of the nuclear family, I think we've also sort of isolated or maybe relegated grandparents to, like if you visit them in the vacations, then maybe you can sort of have that experience where the grandson or the daughter will have that, okay, let me tell you a story, is tarah se. And that, but that isn't something that I see as often as I saw back in the day.
Yeah.
Like I don't see in my own life, like in the families and friends that I'm part of, like where grandchildren and grandparents are spending time, not in the capacity where they're playing or having fun, or a grandmother is taking care, or a grandfather is taking care of the kids. I've seen that, but I haven't seen enough stories of like grandparents saying ki hamare zamane mein aisa hota tha, let me tell you a story then. And then the grandchildren listening with rapt attention. And I wonder as to what's one of, like, maybe we can just speculate on that. What's the reasons for that dying down?
Very much like you said, I think it's because of nuclear families. I think it's because of digital kind of, it definitely has to do with all of us being overly kind of interacting with digital mediums and our screen, and that's just kind of life, right?
Madhuri, I lost you for a sec. Yeah.
Okay, good, because actually I was on a tangent. I was trying to form my thoughts, so let me rephrase that. I think that we don't spend as much time with each other anymore.
Yes.
Physically. It's very, very evident in family structures, for one. I also think people are working harder than ever. The pandemic has been interesting, and I really hope more people have reflected on how much time it's such a rat race towards always doing something and no time for reflection. How will imagination and wonder and things like that thrive in that kind of a climate? And that's what we need to kind of really actively build on, which is why I'm saying it's important that the people who are creating this stuff start thinking about these questions, because there is a responsibility for all of us to not be kind of contributing to that culture in such an aggressive way, and kind of taking the time allowing for a week between two podcast episodes. There's no reason why such a culture cannot exist. In fact, it might have people being able to kind of think about what they're taking away from these conversations a little more rather than like instant reaction, like 43 minutes and 22 seconds, that's it, and you're done and you forget about the whole thing. So it's both nuclear families and just work culture. I'm trying not to say the word capitalism because it's just not.
Yeah, I mean, those are, I think, a bit generalistic explanations when it comes, like, 'cause you can't blame capitalism or everything.
No, I agree. So I'm not going
there. Still though, I still want to keep on the tangent of, so you're trying to reintroduce stories to kids. How much of these stories are different from the stories that you grew up on? In the sense that when I look at the Instagram page that you have, I see stories around, normalizing a conversation around being from a lower caste, or maybe like, stuff like sexism, feminism, right? But I see a large number of social issues that are maybe important to like the more older, socially conscious generation. But I wonder, where are the morals in all of this? Or have we gone so far with our reinventing that maybe like have we like forgotten the morals? I don't know.
I'm not sure I 100% understand your question.
Wait, so let me rephrase it because what I'm basically asking is, when you grew up with a different set of stories, I grew up with a similar set of stories as you, and then there are stories that you are making for both adults and kids, right? And these stories, what they do well is they are talking about stuff that was never talked about before, right? For example, I remember distinctly reading stories about caste, and they came again and again, and even in like stuff like and I hope I'm not saying it, I hope I'm not getting it wrong, but like even in Munshi Premchand, caste roles and caste duties were pretty much set.
As well.
Yeah. Set and stable. There wasn't really a conversation around maybe let's talk about it from the perspective of the porter. Like, he's just not a porter, right? He's more, but you don't see it because you see it as a story about the king, his gestures, and everyone else in the hierarchy, right? So my question is, how do you, when you're reinventing the stories, how do you make sure that the morals stay intact while this new sort of cultural imagination around social issues also gets communicated? Yes.
Okay. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. I think it's important to present as much of it as you can, as long as the stories are fantastic, they're well told, they had significance to the person who's telling them. I'm only speaking in context of Apalam Chapalam. I would stand behind even a story that maybe does not present my ideological beliefs or values right now, because there's place for that too. I don't think that anything should be erased or censored. In fact, I struggle with that kind of culture right now, surrounding a lot of creative expression of different forms, and I would fight for the right of something to exist, and it's up to readers to kind of apply, or viewers or whoever, to apply their own thinking and their own belief systems. To just because you're seeing something that you wish didn't exist doesn't mean that it doesn't. So
yeah,
and it's so important. Why not? In fact, some of the greatest learnings we've had in life is to see something presented so normally, and then you're like, okay, I'm beginning to realize how I don't want that to be the case anymore. What can I do about it? And then there's a kind of which will tell you, like, here are some practical ways to go about kind of not continuing these same patterns and conditionings and behavior.
right.
So yeah, I don't think, look, naturally, I think a lot of the things that we find interesting are going to seep their way into it. So you do see a lot of social issues covered, something that you see across my work since I was 21, 22. And that's upbringing. That's my own personal context and my view of the world. But that doesn't mean that I won't include the voices of others.
Yeah, I saw a thing that you had either on the Minor project, where the singer producer Anushka Manchanda was talking about how it was basically like a card that you fill out where you talk about your childhood, right? And I thought that it was something akin to a slam book, although a slam book felt in retrospect. And I thought that was really interesting because people discredit the
You brought this up.
people discredit the person. People discredit the impact of the childhood on the person that they are. They can say, no, 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 it doesn't matter. I really came into my own when I discovered this at the age of this. But there's so many cemented memories and subconscious experiences that we don't even realize that emerge, at an adult stage. Like, oh, I'm really that because I did that. I mean, you can draw yourself into a grave when you make those conclusions, but there is something to be said about childhood experiences cementing a lot of who you are right now. And I was really fascinated by that whole thing she did about who she was as a kid. Was she a bullied, or like a bystander? Or what stories did she like? Was she beaten? All of those things, right? Yeah.
Wow, you've done your research, and I'm so thrilled you brought it up, honestly, because I'm so proud of that, the way that idea has manifested. And it's rare you get so much creative freedom to kind of try out such things. Like we got lucky with our collaborators. But essentially, the whole idea of that slam sheet was when I was thinking about how do we get over this challenge of getting our generation to care about childhood. The insight that I personally had from all my previous experience as well was it will be difficult for people to put themselves in children's shoes, but it won't be difficult for them to remember how things impacted themselves. We are a more I don't want to use the word selfish, but like there's a lot more individualism in our generations that have happened, and people are willing to talk about it and be vulnerable about it. And through that, that's like, it's the bridge to getting to the next part. It's the bridge to empathy, I would say. And so that's where this idea came from of let's get people, and we have a Hindi slam sheet, we have an English one. One day I hope to have many different languages again. And we've gotten such amazing responses. And I think then people who follow those people immediately you're able to piece together how important this part of our lives are and sort of impact who we become in so many ways. Even if it's to become the opposite of the experiences that you had, it doesn't mean that the impact wasn't there.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really glad you saw that.
Yeah, I'm reading it right now. It says, what did you want to be when you were growing up? What were the adults in your life encouraging about it? She says, I wanted to be a vet at first, then an air hostess. Then, mom would support her, but also laugh at her and all kinds of experiences. Yeah. And one thing that I think is really fascinating is possessions, which is the question number 3. What was your favorite possession? Because since we're talking about childhood, I had this red basket, like a huge red basket of toys. And I'm talking about, these were not brand new toys, because brand new toys I would just keep in the respective boxes. These were broken toys, toys with missing pieces, toys that still worked, but had sort of lost the shine and charm for me. And I had this, I'm still very obsessive, right? But I had this thing where if I played with my toys, I didn't care what time it was or what emergency it was or mere ko kaun bula raha tha. I would just fill the entire basket up, carry that huge fucking thing around with me wherever I went inside the house. And it's not like it's a basket on wheels. It's just a basket. I would drag it across the floor. But I remember that being so, it informed basically how I even think about stuff. Even now, when I'm doing this podcast, I bring my speaker with me. I bring my coffee mug with me. I bring all this stuff. And I don't feel at ease until I bring everything back home. It's very weird.
1000% relate. I think objects are very interesting. I think when we were coming up with the questions, that was a very immediate one that came up. Like I had something called a nachinata, which is this old, it was like a golden pillowcase that was brown and destroyed by the end of 2 years with me, to be honest. And there are these attachments that form with certain possessions that don't have meaning to anyone else, but you kind of put that meaning into it, right? I'm watching the same thing happen with my niece and nephew. She has a little giraffe called Gabby, which she's obsessed with, I just think I think these were things that we thought people would enjoy reflecting on, but at the same time reveal something larger, right? When you ask this question, were you the bully, the bullied? or both, neither or both. It's a lot. Because what we're really seeing is when hundreds of people fill up these sheets, you realize what a huge problem bullying is. Or were you slapped as a kid? In India, I can't think. I would say 75% of the people, and I'm very comfortable backing that up.
Yeah.
Say yes, it was absolutely normal. We don't hate our parents. It was so normalized that that was a way of life, but it doesn't mean that we can't challenge those notions now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And think about how we want to do it differently for following generations.
Yeah. I mean, I can only speak for myself in that capacity. I don't resent my parents for like a few slaps here and there, and it was mostly my mom. But it's very interesting that she has this whole notion like, oh, I'm so sorry I beat you as a kid. She still has some guilt around. I'm like, I don't fucking remember that. I just remember like some distant blows here and there in the past, but like that's about it. I don't hate you. I love you. And it also showcases the psychology of being a parent, because when you have kids, and I haven't had kids, but I've heard psychological literature and lectures around this, that it really showcases the dark sides of your psyche. And often the most convenient way to express that, and sadly we're all human and mortal, it just comes out on the kids, and in India it's so normal. Like, we probably missed it, but there was an entire culture of wrapping people on their knuckles with scales and rulers, right? And murga banana class ke andar, all kinds of things that I remember the last time we raised hands in the class like this, like raise your hands,
Yeah.
was maybe in 7th grade, and then never again.
Yeah.
But it's strange to see those things going out of fashion. I wonder if corporal punishment and beatings have completely gone out of the Indian scene now.
No, unfortunately not. That's what the is about in many ways. Corporal punishment is one of our focus topics, and it's unbelievable. But it's so interesting, the perspective that Leher and UNICEF have brought to the table of, it's so easy to point the finger at the teacher being like, how can you punish? You also need to work with them to see what do you need, because there is a need for discipline and structure, and you could have a child who is, acting out for many different reasons, but it's about giving them the resources and the environment that's necessary to be able to address that in a different way, because there are different ways. And it's so difficult in a country like India, population, like such sheer number alone. And I think just the culture, both at home, in schools, and our institutions, has been so different for such a long time. This is going to take many, many decades to fix. But the right way to do that is to really instill this kind of thinking and develop it slowly, not be impatient about it, maintain hope around such things. They can and they will. I mean, once upon a time, sati used to exist, and it absolutely isn't, anymore. And fine, it took an extremely long time, but that means that the seeds that we plant now have the potential to kind of grow into something very important, maybe after, long after we've existed. So it doesn't mean it's not important. You may not see, the results in your own lifetime, but yeah.
Yeah. There's a psychologist called Sudhir Kakkar. He's like known as the father of psychoanalysis in India. And he said, he made a very interesting observation about how childhood is perceived in India and childhood is perceived in other countries. So childhood, every culture has a golden period where they're like, okay, this is the era or a set of years where you're supposed to shine. This is your time. Adulthood is the golden period for all Western cultures. In India, the golden period is childhood. There's all childhood. I mean, unless, people were abused and something really bad and traumatic happened. Most people would agree that our perceptions of childhood, or even our depictions of childhood in India, have been very rose tinted, very like wine colored days, like those 70s Amitabh Bachchan Ali movies. The kids are always in shorts, and they're always like roaming around here and there, having fun and stuff, Malgory Days is another one, right? Although, oh wow, Malgory Days was so interesting. Have you watched it?
I haven't watched it. I've read Malgory Days and love R.K. Narayan and think it's iconic and all Indian children should read it.
Yeah, even now, like despite the fact that these stories were based in what, like the 30s or the 40s, like way earlier, the very small nuances about how Rajam is this kid who's the rich kid and his dad has the power, and Swami wants to impress him, and as a result he's like, Dad, wo aaj mere ghar aa raha hai, I'm not going to show him my room. Can I receive him in your room? And because Rajam knows what's up, he's like, are these your books? I don't think you read these books. And the lie is exposed. But these little innocent things that children do to sort of understand dynamics that are different from the world that they exist in is fascinating.
Agreed. I love that perspective, and also amazing because I haven't thought about Malgory Days like that in a really long time. Um, I mean, there's a lot of interesting kind of films now that are coming out with a child's point of view that are more contemporary, and yeah, I don't really have anything more to add to this because I think we we don't it's nice to kind of show the innocence of childhood even when it's in a setting where the which is dark. That's actually one of the most amazing things. There's a lot of Iranian films actually which are centered around the child, and we've covered that on Apalam, as well as Indian ones where it's quite amazing because you can tackle some, even Jojo Rabbit, if you saw it.
What is Jojo Rabbit?
Jojo Rabbit is so amazing because it's like a young child growing up in Nazi Germany. I'm laughing while I'm saying it, because it's that well addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And he becomes really, Hitler is his imaginary friend, essentially. And he's just 9 or 10, and it's so heartwarming. You completely understand why, he's seeing the propaganda everywhere, and he's like, I am his little foot soldier. But then he falls in love with a Jewish refugee girl who's just, also hiding in his house. And it's incredible. You must watch it. I think that's one of it's Waika. Well, every time I say his name, Waika Taiti.
What's that name?
If you've seen What We Do in the Shadows, he's this incredible filmmaker, really, really funny.
Jojo Rabbit.
Yeah, he's the director of this film. And I think that's one of the nicest modern kind of representations of childhood where you really show the innocence of a child and how even in the worst of surroundings, they somehow still have that perspective. And that's why it's really sad when it gets taken away too early, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, cognitive dissonance is a bliss when you're a child because you can make beauty out of the worst tragedy possible. Is that especially true for? I was on one of these Instagrams, and you had a story about Minor and Murli. This kid who is called Minor.
What this is about? It's the very rough sketch of that.
Oh damn! So Murli is the elephant, and Minor is this kid, and despite everything messing up in his life, and I'm assuming he has to live the life of like a young laborer of some kind, or someone who works early on in his life. Yeah.
It wasn't that specific. It was really supposed to be representative of all the different kinds of atrocities that children face. It could just as easily be an urban setting or rural setting. And the idea is that with the right kind of adult support around children, they are able to kind of overcome these things. It's not that these things don't exist, but all they really need is the one who I love Murli because of her gentle giant kind. We've used her physical attributes to kind of talk about the emotional support. So her big ears make her a good listener, and Minor knows that he can tell her secrets because children find it really hard to talk about things like child sexual abuse, for example. So when they have that sort of trust that's built, what we wanted to depict was a wonderful dynamic between adult and child that can exist. And so Murli is who we want adults like ourselves to aspire towards. And Minor is indicative of what childhoods in India as a majority do look like, and what we can do about it. And there was like sort of magical component to it of like, together we're going to go off on these adventures. So that,
it's remarkable how children personalize things to feel safe. And I have a hunch it's because after a certain point, even despite having the most doting mother or father, you realize that adults are still fickle. Adults will not be consistent. And when you can find an inanimate object or maybe an animal who you can keep consistent, who will sort of like be your safe space to express. It's just so wonderful to see that. It's the same thing we talked about, how we personalize blankets or we maternalize the names of rivers. It all stems from that trying to, I don't know, trying to basically project an adult or a parent onto something inanimate or non-human to feel safe and feel like, and it's remarkable how, animals are also drawn to children because they realize like these kids are harmless. They just it's very, very strange. My sister had this thing where whenever she would become upset, she would just go outside and all the stray dogs in the colony would just come and sit by her. It's not like she was actively calling them out. They just knew, like, this is our person. I never had that. I was like, a fucking dogs. Like, main kya karu tumse milke? But it's amazing how children will send out these vibrations in the universe. And I know I'm getting a bit woo-woo here. But animals, respond to that.
You'll find that that's a parallel between Apalam Chapalam and the Minor Project, where we've kept this animal kind of character. So you have Madan the Monkey and Apalam, and they both have their own backstories and context. I don't know if you've read about it.
I haven't. I will check it out.
Yeah, I'll send that to you. But Madan basically is a little bit naughtier, and he's going from house to house and collecting it. And over there, because the audience was primarily children, we wanted Madan the Monkey to become kind of like a character that they're excited about. He's got a lot of quirks. He's a lot more fun. But when it came to Minor Project, like the conceptualization around it is Murli is now we're speaking to adults and we're tackling much more serious kind of topics. And how do we do that in a way that we don't alienate them, but they're still interested? There's still a storytelling component to it. I've gone super advertising on you in the second half.
No, not at all. As you were saying that, I was thinking about, wow, the world of animals has, especially in popular culture, has really gone through a shift even in the years that I've grown up. Because at first, animals represent jungle kingdom. Matlab, animal, Sher is the Raja and everything like that, right? So going from jungle kingdom to animals in Champak. I don't know if you read Champaks, right? So Champak is like semi-human stories. And I had like a junior editor of Champak on this podcast when I was living in Mumbai, Adirat Singh. He works at Vice now. He talked about how Champak stories...
Vice, I love it.
Yeah, that's crazy, I know. But he was talking about how Champak stories were basically the first stories to subtly introduce the power of science, where whenever someone was doing some hoaxes, science or logic would prevail. Then we have things like HBO's Animal series, which is like a dark series about how animals do fucked up things. And then we have Bojack Horseman, where like, you have mental health stigmas, like human failings in animals, and animals embody those. It's very strange to go from Arey Jungle Ka Raja to fucking animals like doing cocaine. It's just absurd, this whole idea, how we can basically project whatever we want onto animals and they'll exactly represent that.
I love that. It's such a great observation, and I think in some subconscious way I have thought about that as well. And it's interesting that you went to Bojack Horseman and like animals doing cocaine, because that's reflective of the human condition right now, I'm not saying doing cocaine as a human condition, but that level of kind of, addiction and inability to cope, and all of that has kind of been projected onto this. Whereas in the past, it was so much about integrity and honor, and this animal is a good animal, but the snake, you don't want to be the snake.
Yeah.
It's an easier way where people feel less attacked themselves, because you're expected to see qualities of yourself in these characters, but that slight distance and that slight removal. And that's what I love about children's literature in general, that you can really tell the truth in the most fun kind of imaginative ways. In fact, so many of the children's books that I have written have been based on people in my actual life, very, very close, intimate relationships, ex-boyfriends. It's true what they say, never date a writer. But it's in the end, like what I truly want to publish a book that's based. So, there's the boy who spoke to machines, the girl who couldn't say no. And you have all of these these kind of character traits that become so familiar to us. We all know a person like that in adulthood,
Yeah, they represent archetypes of people,
They,
basically.
they
Yeah.
represent archetypes, exactly. But to be able to tell it in this form has so much more kind of room and non-judgmentalism attached to it, which I personally really enjoy creating. It's like world building that allows you to have conversations around these topics. So really, I've never understood why children's literature is like categorized as a separate kind of genre, because most adults I know love that still. If you
Yeah.
give them a great children's book, they're going to devour it and be like, this was my interpretation of that. Dr. Seuss is like that. So
Yeah. When you were saying that, I couldn't help but think about how, say, you have a children's story, but it has about 8 or 9 characters.
right.
The difficulty is remembering those names as a child,
Yeah.
and remembering, and they have to, if they're not physical, if you can't tell them physically apart in the story,
Right.
some part of the story is fundamentally lost, because you're so, half of your cognitive strength is spent in figuring out who's who. But when you have animals, right, you instantly know that the giraffe is going to be tall, the lion is going to be like this, the elephant. So because you have these distinct physical characteristics, it's very easy to animate them with emotions. And then as you grow up on that animal story culture, you can then do something like what Bojack Horseman does, where you break the expectation of what an animal can do, where you're like, this horse, which you see as this glamorous stallion like animal, like this majestic animal, can actually have depression, or can have imposter syndrome, all of those things. But it only happens because once you've had a culture of being able to understand, being able to see a horse as a horse and a lion as a lion, that you start to really break those expectations. I don't know. I just thought of that, and I think that's really cool that we as adults responded so potently to Bojack Horseman, because because otherwise it's so right. Because one of the other things is, if you have something like that, something like a Bojack Horseman world where there's humans and animals, but you only have humans, then you run in the whole idea of, okay, Indians can't relate to it क्योंकि ये सारी USA की बात है, या फिर like some other country cannot relate to it because you have the cultural context of being in the US. All of that is taken away. Instead, what you have is these animals who live in this fictional world. It's a parody of Hollywood, but not really.
Right.
And there isn't a lot you have to read up on to catch up with what's happening, because it's emotions at play.
I love what you said, especially about the physical characteristics and being thing that you can kind of put emotion into in some ways. Like, naturally the giraffe is tall, so you expect that way. But I think that you can apply the same thing to inanimate objects as well. Just again, in the world of children's literature,
Right.
what there's, for example, there's this small story I've written called Riot in a Geometry Box, and it was kind of based off of, you remember those Camlin boxes we
Yes, of
used
course.
to have orange and yellow, and then you have set squares, and you have a compass, and you have the protractor.
Right.
And the whole the theme of the entire book is kind of about perspective and physical attributes. So everyone loves the parallelogram because he's slim, but no one likes the rhombus, who is like a bit chubbier, and like he's a fatter
Interesting.
version of the parallelogram. And then when there's basically the geometry box tells him, if you go higher up and you look at your shape from up there, you become the shape of a diamond. So it's all about perspective.
Wow. Have you published this story?
I haven't, but I'll be happy to send it to you. One day I will. My sister is very keen to illustrate.
Yeah, because I want to know about the protractor. I never use that guy as in food.
Yeah. The protractor is like sheep. It's like just making observations about everyone else in the geometry box, but not partaking themselves.
Wow. See, that's what I'm saying. You can really use spare energy and imagination and make these stories. I want to ask you, what skills do you need to even write a story? Like, because I write a lot,
Right.
and I've been trying to get into fiction, but what do you do? Like, how do you build these worlds? How do you decide this is going to be like this? I mean, how do you start with fiction?
This is such an interesting question because I'm never sure how to answer it actually. Look, I don't do fiction for a living yet. That's given
Yes.
me a lot of feeling.
Yes. I mean, just the fact that you've written a story. So I'm not asking you as like Neil Gaiman, please tell me, like, give me your masterclass. I'm really just saying, how do I write a story in fiction? Because you've already written
How
one.
do you write a story? You start with an idea, right? Like it's just a little seed, and then you build around it. It's okay. I've had both experiences where inspiration strikes and you can't help it. Like it comes through you
Right.
almost. I find poetry and verse formats, which a lot of children's books are in, much like that quite often. And I've always I've not wondered. Sometimes I've been able to go about it in a more disciplined way as well, where I know I want to do this. I'm going to sit down and write one version of this every day.
Right.
So, for example, recently a Singapore-based independent magazine reached out to me and gave me the theme of identity and said, you can write anything you want, any writer's dream. My first reaction was like, I don't know if I can just do that, but within minutes, I knew what I wanted to do, and it was totally out there. And I ended up writing. Do you want to hear about it?
Yeah. Please go on. I do want to hear about it.
It's basically, it was right at the beginning of lockdown, and I actually went deep into this. It's poetry prose format kind of, and this is, again, it's not for children, it's for adults. And it's essentially me dissecting my own body. So it starts out with a letter to my lawyer about how I don't have anything left to give. So my body kind of it's an autopsy of my identity essentially.
Right.
And the different parts that the pathologist cuts, he gets through food recipes and through certain food memories that I have, he's able to kind of identify memories that made me into who I am, and I think shaped my character in many ways. And in the end, all of that kind of goes to hell. Just never mind. I don't know why I went on this tangent.
No, that's good.
The idea is that there is no one process.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's this beautiful book of poems that has a lot of visuals by this Vietnamese poet called Monica Ong. I read that as a assigned reading for a poetry class in college, and I'm so glad that I did, because I'd sort of been disenfranchised by the rupee cores of the world, because it just seemed like it was not for me. Like I couldn't relate to that experience. But this woman does this wonderful thing where she's like, she grew up in a conservative Vietnamese household, and they had practices like wearing shoes that are 4 or 5 sizes shorter than what you're actually supposed to wear to make your feet look pretty. And there's also an idea around beauty standards and fairness. So there's whitening cream. So what she did is she put her poems inside the objects that Vietnamese people use to beautify themselves, and they are amazing. If you read it, it's basically like family photographs that have poems inside them. It's all in a book, and it's these really interesting parodies of teeth whitening cream that'll help you, get this perfect groom and stuff. And I couldn't help but think how you can basically use, like you said, like use your own body, because she talked about how her hands were, like there's also this thing that back in Victorian England they would do. It's called a corset, like where you use it to essentially shorten or like stop the growth of your torso. So she had all of these poems in these different objects, and I thought that was really cool.
It's amazing. It sounds incredible, and I'm going to check it out as soon as our podcast is done. There's another great Vietnamese poet called Ocean Wong. And he's written a memoir called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It's doing quite well. It's out there now, I think. Must read it.
I think we should share a bunch of recommendations after this podcast, because there's a lot of things. One more question. What are you reading nowadays?
Oh, God. So many things. Just because you said we should share the recommendations, I built this at the beginning of lockdown for a lot of my friends. We call it I have called it the Cabinet of Curiosities. And
that's nice.
Basically different sheets. It's in an awful Excel sheet format, but it has like this, it's like a portal into like the most amazing things, podcasts, books, etc. Right now, I'll tell you some of the things that are still lingering. I'm reading many things currently, but something that really was incredible was The Soul of an Octopus,
Interesting.
which, I keep going from like non-fiction phases to fiction phases. So Soul of an Octopus was from this beautiful article I read called Deep Intellect, which really made me think about like octopuses, whatever the plural is. It made me think about them very differently, and it's quite amazing. They have individual personalities. So I like when science kind of intersects with imagination and poetry and things like that in a really beautiful way. I think this kind of captures that sentiment. And the other is Ocean Wong on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, an amazing memoir. And then I read a lot again in the last year and a half after a long, like during homegrown years, it was extremely hard to really read, I think. So I came back to that and I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, there's a creative period and then there's an immersive period. Like when you read, it's just a different mindset. Like when I've been aggressively trying to like get my content thing going, like really going. So all I can do is learn from what I put out. I don't have enough time to read, but when I do read, oh my God, it's like the uncoiling of all anxieties. It's like that.
Absolutely. I was having this conversation with two friends the other day, in fact, when I think reading is a very important formative experience that people need to do because it's different from film. It's different from like viewing art. You have to actually reflect, and the reader and his or her like interpretation is as important as whatever the writer or the teller is saying. It's a collaborative process also, and I think that's one of the most incredible things about reading.
Yeah, it's a very private experience. It takes a while to consume. You do it alone. Yes. And it has a very high how do I say it? Like it's a lot of information that you alone have to process and be with. Yes. With the movie, everything is in motion. In this, and I'm yet to meet someone who can finish a novel and start the next right after, because it takes a while. It just forces you to stop, let the story cement,
right,
then move on. Yeah.
I might be that someone, but it depends on the novel.
Okay. Well, you are the first one. I'm glad that I discovered that at the end of this podcast. At least I could cross that metric off my head. Yo, Mandovi, this has been a blast having you on this podcast. I am my bladder is full, so I'm gonna have to like. I thought
actually ditto.
Yeah, I usually outlast my guests in this, but I had this really strong Bandra coffee. So we're gonna have to cut it off. But it's been great having you on the podcast. I'm so excited for everything that Apalam Chapalam does. Got it right this time. And people can obviously follow Apalam Chapalam on Instagram and the Menon Project and whatever it is that you do, and they can follow you on Instagram at Mandovi Menon, right?
Correct. Thank you so much. Your bladder much longer, but really it was incredible, and I truly enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Take
All right,
care.
fantastic.
Bye.
Bye-bye.